Hey, we're kicking off this 3-week series today, a crazy little thing called love. And it really comes out of this hope that I have for us here at GCC, Green Lane Christian Centre, to be a place for all people, married or single, that will deal really well and live really well with this crazy little thing called love. Because throughout fairy tales and a whole bunch of different things, we get this perception of a crazy little thing called love, don't we? And as a father of 4 young kids, 8 and under, 2, 4, 6, 8, I've seen lots of fairy tales and probably every single Barbie movie that's out there. And so I've kind of got used to the plot line, right? And so normally this guy meets girl, and somewhere during the movie, this crazy little thing called love develops, and one thing leads to another, and they find themselves at the altar. He says, I do, she says, I do, and then this storybook romance leads into a storybook marriage, happily ever after. And sorry if I've ruined the plot line for you if you're watching any of those from here on in. But that's normally how it seems to be, isn't it? And my kids watching these movies, they're kind of like jumping off the ceiling and they're all happy and they're excited more than they usually are because they're just so happy about the movie and how all that tends to be. And I wonder if fairy tales like that, with these happily ever after ends, affect the box of dreams that we seem to bring into life with us. All of us have dreams, don't we? And those dreams relate to relationships and marriage too. And so I would imagine in our box of dreams, you've dreamt that one day you'll meet Ms. Right, and she'll look a lot like Barbie, and or you'll meet Mr. Right, and he'll look a lot like Ken. And one day you'll come together, a few things will happen, and this crazy little thing called love will happen, and you'll find yourself at the altar, and you'll have this amazing wedding. You'll invite all your friends, even your Facebook friends, and they'll be there too, and they'll see, Barbie all dressed up like a princess. She'll never wear something like this again, but on this day, she looks like a princess up the front, and Ken, he scrubs up pretty well too, and he's up the front, and they're there, and they say, I do, and they kiss each other afterwards, and all their friends are there, and it's just like an amazing day. And all this particular food is served, and you're off on a honeymoon, and you have some dreams about what it looks like. And then there's some other dreams that come with that whole storybook story, right? So one of them is that you dream that you'll be able to, have a house one day, big old house to live in, and man, that'd be a pretty cool dream to have. And you dream that you'll be able to, maybe after a year or two, or maybe after 5 years, who knows, you'll have children. Maybe 2 children, or maybe 8 children, or maybe, Ken says, there's enough children in the world, but I'm not dreaming of any more children. There's, and then, you might be dreaming of, the perfect car you've always wanted, and it's just there, and, dream that one day you'll have all the money you want, and you'll be driving your dream car, and then you dream about particular nights, or you dream about how Barbie will do all the cleaning, just like your mum did all the cleaning in the house too. That's going to be, how it's going to be, and it's going to be fun. Or you dream about how your schedule will be. So, your clock is set to a particular thing, and, the schedule is going to be that, Saturday nights you're going to be sitting hand in hand by the fireplace, or a Christmas time comes and you'll be off to your parents' place for Christmas, and just all part of this dream and the way it all tends to work out too. And of course, Barbie's going to be doing all the cleaning because that's how your mum did it too. So she'll be cleaning all the windows, or it might be that Ken's going to be doing all the maintenance around the house, and because your dad was always there with his tape measure and screwdriver and hammer, and just seemed to always be able to fix anything, didn't matter what was broken. You have all these dreams that we tend to bring to things. Of course, we even have some dreams about kind of life in bed, and us guys tend to dream of what wife might not wear. Flannel pajamas would be in that category, tending to be, But, ladies, you kind of dream, I'm going to marry someone who just accepts me as I am and understands that comfort is so good, and those kind of fluffy pajamas just feel so good, because he's a knight in shining armor, right? And he's going to be muscular, and everything's going to be there for us, and have all these dreams that we bring. And, of course, we have all the money that we could ever need to go and have adventures and travel and all these different things. And as a pastor, I've led a lot of pre-marriage counseling sessions, And one of the things I tend to do for couples is I give them a piece of paper each, separate them, and then ask them to draw a picture of the dreams they have for marriage. And these are typically the elements that go into that dream in some way, which raises a question. Where did this crazy little thing called love come from? Where do these dreams come from? And if you're new to the Bible, maybe you're not aware of this, but it kind of goes right back to the very beginning when God created the world. And in the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, you come to Genesis chapter 1, and you read how God created everything. On day 1, he created, and it finishes saying it was good. On day 2, he created, and it was good. It's like this song, and it has this rhythm, and God did something, and it was good, and God did something, and it was good, and God did something, and it was good, and God did something, and it was good. And then you come to chapter 2, and you expect it to continue to say it was good, and carry on the song. But you read this. It is not good, God says, for the man to be alone. I'll make a companion for him who corresponds to him. So here in this Garden of Eden, God has created the first man, Adam. And Adam doesn't realize that he's a community being shaped in the character of God, doesn't quite realize all that yet. So God helps him to see it. And so what God does is he brings all these animals to Adam, the first man. And he asks Adam to name them. We read, the Lord God formed from the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would call them, and the man chose a name for each one. He gave names to all the livestock, all the birds of the sky and all the wild animals, but still there was no helper just right for him. Now the whole point here is God isn't bringing the animals to Adam just to curious what name Adam might give them. The whole point is for Adam to realize that things come in couples, and Adam doesn't have a suitable companion. And so all these couples, animals start coming, and Adam, looks at the striped animals that walk past, and he goes, I guess what, Mr. Zebra, Mrs. Zebra. They're they're slightly different, but they're the same. He looks at the lions as they walk in, Mr. Lion, Mrs. Lion, Mr. Elephant, Mrs. Elephant. All these different animals as they come. He comes up with a name for them. But at the end of the day, he realizes that there's no suitable companion for him. None of these animals are like him. They're all different. And he suddenly realizes he's alone. And that was the whole point of the exercise that God put him through. So God puts Adam to sleep. And Adam wakes up, and out of a rib, the story goes that God made Eve. And he brings Eve to Adam to name, just like she's one of the others that's come. But Adam suddenly realizes she's not like the others. She's like him. And so in the original language, the word he gives her, that the name he gives to her is Isha, which means woman, because his name is Ish, man. He says, you're like Isha, coming from Ish, and you're a woman coming from man. In fact, the first words he uses are these. And in fact, they're poetry, which might say the very first words in the Bible any man ever says is poetry, which might kind of be good advice to us guys about how to attract someone of the opposite sex. This is what Adam says. At last, this one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken from man. She's the Isha taken from Ish. Adam sees the connection. He realizes that she's different, but she's like him and suitable to him. And that's how it all began. And then the narrator of Genesis kind of puts this editorial comment about marriage. It says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Because he says it's pretty strange when you think about it, isn't it? Somebody has been at home with their parents for years and years and years, decades. They're biologically related in this relationship that's, blood related. And they would trade that and move off to live with somebody for the rest of their life, with someone who they don't know nearly as much as this group of people, their parents, family. And they would move from here and set up a new family unit. And the narrative says, this is why it happens. God made us to want to be with somebody else. God made us as community beings that hunger after this crazy little thing called love. And so this remark, we trade this one for something else. It tends to be what happened. And a lot of people in life. So in other words, this is why, where are they? Ken and Barbie get together in this crazy little thing called love. That Barbie comes and Ken comes and they say, I do, and this happily ever after thing is meant to develop. But it kind of raises a question for us, doesn't it? Because this crazy little thing is often very difficult. So why is that? Because whether you're single here or married, all of us have seen enough of relationships that are painful and are hard and difficult. And that, Ken and Barbie don't seem to just be happily ever after all the time. It's hard. And so the story in Genesis says that the very, very next chapter, it didn't take them long, the very next chapter is what theologians call the fall. Where Adam and Eve reached out for something that they weren't meant to grasp, something that God had made them for. And they reach out and they take this fruit of the tree that led to a different destination really for them. And as they reach out to take their identity and their security and something outside of the life that God made for them, it all goes all goes pear-shaped for them, and it goes bad. And the very first thing that the fall affected was relationships. It's not that the whole world has changed in bad ways here, that the very first implication their decision has is the difficulty in relationships. Eyes of both of them, Adam and Eve, were opened and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. They wanted to keep the other person away. They were once close, but now that they've reached out for something beyond the life that God made for them, there's a pushing away of the other. They want to hide from each other. There's a sense of shame present in the relationship. So you want to know why we struggle in this crazy little thing called love? It goes right back to the tree where because of this thing that happened, we now all struggle in relationships. We all struggle with love. We find this crazy little thing called love difficult from here on in. And so what tends to happen ever since then is Ken and Barbie stand together at the altar and they look, sparkling. They look glowing. She's a princess, he's a prince. And they marry each other and they, kiss and I do and all that. And then they go on a honeymoon. And then what normally happens within a few weeks or a few months, certainly within a few next pages of this storybook marriage, storybook romance, is something remarkable happens. They both bring this box of dreams into their marriage. And they stand at the altar and all these dreams they have that they think are going to be fulfilled, but as soon as the marriage happens, within a few weeks, within a few months, the box of dreams becomes a box of expectations. And so all these dreams that exist up here start to become things that Ken and Barbie expect of each other. So Ken looks at Barbie and says, well, I thought I married Ms. Right, but you don't look so right to me after all. And Barbie looks at Ken and he doesn't really look as he did when he got married and doesn't seem to be Mr. Right after all. And they look at some of the expectations they bring, and often there's this clash. So this house that they dreamed they would live in, for Barbie it was this old house, and for Ken it's like, well, no, I want the modern house, or they live in Auckland where we can't even have a house. And it's just all these different things, or they finally get something, but it's not the house of their dreams, and then it is mortgage that they never thought of, and all these expectations start to put pressure on their relationship. Or this car that they thought they would kind of have and buy. It just, they thought, I dream of this car and I dream that, we're going to be able to buy whatever. But now I feel like somebody's censoring me and I can't buy what I want. And it's now a family car because suddenly Barbie's wanting to talk about these little ones. And she's dreaming of 2 kids or 8 children. And Ken here's going, I think the world's overpopulated as it is, honey. And these dreams are very different from each other and they become expectations. Or it might be that actually both want kids at some point, but because of the fall and the way the world and our lives break down, maybe children can't come because of infertility, and it just puts pressure on their relationship again. It's not what they dreamed would happen. And suddenly all of this starts to change. And again, Ken, comes home and expects Barbie to be doing, well, why haven't you done the cleaning, honey? I saw that on the bench. My mother would never have left that on the bench. Ken has particular expectations. And then, Barbie notices that there's some light bulbs that need changing, there's a particular thing, and her dad used to always do that, but, Ken doesn't, not step in, or maybe even a bigger problem, he does step in, but he's not very good. And so she says, can you put a picture up on the wall? And she comes back and there's a big hole in the wall because Ken has no idea what he's doing. Certainly not like Barbie's dad was. This isn't the way it's meant to be. And then, Ken comes home again and the windows aren't so clean and he expects them to be clean because his mum always kept really clean windows. And then in bed, things aren't what expecting either. And, she wears the flannel pajamas and she's never in the mood. And, and she realizes that he's kind of has different ideas and it just seems to be all different. And he's no longer the knight in shining armor. He seems to be like bulging but not with muscle anymore. And this whole schedule thing is they put their alarms and they thought that they would have, chats by the fireplace on Saturday nights, but now they argue over, whose job is it to light the fire anyway? He says, well, why aren't we going to my parents for Christmas? Why do we have to go to yours? I don't like your parents. Why don't we go to my place? And suddenly all these dreams have become expectations. One pastor, Andy Stanley, talks about syndromes that people tend to develop. There's the he syndrome and the she syndrome. The HE syndrome stands for the high expectation syndrome. He's messy. He's forgetful. He's inattentive. The she syndrome, the SHE syndrome, stands for the super high expectation syndrome. She's always late. She's not a good cook. Or she's not in the mood. All these syndromes catch us, don't they? All of them. Where our dreams have become expectations. And it happens to all of us. You see, again, we stand at the altar, and in our dreams, it's all going to be just happily ever after, but within weeks of the honeymoon, certainly within a year or two of the honeymoon, what tends to happen is three things. First, you begin to see how selfish this wonderful person really is. That you thought they were Mr. or Ms. Right, but now they seem really selfish. And they're like dumping all these expectations on you, and they want you to be like, her mom or his, her dad, and all these different things are starting to come through. A second thing starts to happen too. Apparently this wonderful person is having a similar experience to you, and they begin to tell you that you're selfish, and you're dumping all these expectations onto them, and they want that to stop. And then as you're kind of processing that, kind of a third thing tends to happen. Though there's some truth in the fact that you're selfish, you conclude that his or her selfishness is even worse than yours and even more problematic. And it puts pressure on marriage. And life is already hard because of the effects of the fall anyway, with sickness and disease and infertility and selfishness of wider world and community. And then you're trying to deal with this in your own self and the person of your spouse. When dreams become expectations, a few things happen. First is that people dismiss all hope of a life-giving marriage. I see this particularly among many singles now. There's kind of a growing pessimism around marriage. It's like we've watched too many fairy tale stories, too many of those things, and we're just pessimistic about it because we actually realize that relationships are fraught with difficulty. And so in response to that, a lot of people have just ditched the whole thing. Don't want a bar of it. In fact, some recent research done this last year in the States said less than a third of the high school senior girls and only slightly more than a third of the boys seem to believe that marriage is more beneficial to individuals than the alternative. In other words, 2/3 believe it's better not to be married. Yet this negative attitude is contrary to the available empirical evidence, which consistently indicates the substantial personal as well as social benefits of being married compared to staying single or just living with someone. So let me talk to you for a moment if you're single. Many of you are not married. Some of you have been married. Something happened and you're no longer married. Some of you don't want to be married. Some of you do want to be married but just haven't had the opportunity. But all around you, no doubt, is this negative perception of marriage everywhere. Things like, comments like marriage crushes individual identity, or marriage stifles passion. I remember hearing that in a church community when I got engaged. People would joke about it all the time. Oh, you won't be romantic anymore. That kind of goes. It's just a piece of paper. I hear that one all the time. This complicates love. If you feel romantic passion, just stay like that. You don't need a piece of paper to prove that. It just complicates the relationship. And if you kind of buy into any of those ideas, I'm hoping that in this series and in the months and years to come, you will see that marriage is glorious, but also that you'll get a realistic picture of marriage. Because the research consistently actually says married people are consistently show much higher degree of satisfaction with their lives than people who are single, divorced, or living with a partner. And I'm hoping that you'll see that marriage is the most wonderful of relationships, but also the most painful of relationships at times. When dreams become expectations, it's easy also for people to mistakenly look for Mr. or Ms. Right. Sometimes we're driven, it's like people can have this fluoromatic gadget at times. And they meet somebody, and then finally they see a blemish somewhere in their appearance or in their habits or something, and they kind of cross them off the list and they go looking for someone else. But Mr. or Ms. Right just don't exist. The fall teaches us that there is something in each one of us that's messed up, that's broken. And I'm not encouraging you to just go and find anybody, that if you're single, you would just meet a Christian and it should just work out. I'm not encouraging you just to speed through that whole process. Choose well. But at the same time, there's a sense where we can just be overlooking for perfection that doesn't exist. Marriage is effectively two flawed people coming together to create a space of stability, love, and consolation. There's another thing that tends to happen when dreams become expectations. It's that the marriage covenant is turned into a performance contract. At the altar, Barbie and Ken stand there, and they say some pretty cool words to each other. That, I'll be there for you in sickness, health, and plenty, and in want, all these different things. What often happens, though, a few weeks after the honeymoon, certainly within the year or two after the wedding, is Ken comes home, and he sees that Barbie still hasn't cleaned up. And he's like, no, you promised me at the altar. Remember, you said these words. You made a promise before God that you would do these things, that you would look after me. And Barbie looks at Ken and says, no, you made a promise to me that you would do these things for me. And so I demanded now, I want to cash in on this promise that you made to me. Because you're committed to me. We're in for this keeps now. I want something from this. And the dreams so easily turn into expectation. The covenant turns into this performance contract. And so often we feel like our spouse has kind of a clipboard, piece of paper, pen in their hand, and it's like doing some kind of NZQA evaluation. And so they look and go, how is he doing on the listening? Not so good, maybe a 5 out of 10, not so good. How is she doing on the cleaning or the cooking? How is he doing on the maintenance? Or how is this working on the different roles that I expect and perceive this to be happening? How does he spend money? He's really stingy, or she spends way too much. So another cross. Are they good with the kids? Are they good in bed? Are they good at, whatever? And we kind of just tend to evaluate people because we have all these expectations. But you see, that's the problem. When our dreams become expectations, even if our spouse measured up to the expectation we have, all they get is just a tick pass mark. That's all. They have to exceed the expectation if we're going to appreciate them. Because, we signed into this. We expect something from our spouse. If you expected a house and you get a house, you're just back to zero because that's what you expected. It doesn't make you happy. It's just you thought, I expected this. And suddenly you're let down every time it's less than what you expected to see happen. And when that happens, the intimacy, the trust, the romance is gone. There's no margin for unconditional love, and marriage is built on unconditional love. I remember when I got engaged to Robin, and something happened during our dating when I guess we were talking about roles or something came up, and I suddenly realized that the dreams I had for marriage, which were fast becoming the expectations for me, that she wasn't going to live up to the expectations, the demands I had on some of the role issues. And some discussion, I can't remember what it was, but I suddenly realized, what am I stepping into? This isn't what I, planning to sign up to. And so I called the pastor who was going to marry me, and I'm like dumping all these things on him. And she said this, and, I'm just not really, and chatting away. And then he stopped me and he said, okay, can I just ask you a really straight question? Do you want a marriage partner that you can journey through life with together? Or do you want a maid with some perks? Ouch. It was hard. But you think that's kind of bad? Listen to the answer I gave him. Can't I have both? You can look at your husband now and be thankful that you married him rather than me, right? Because I was a jerk, in the early stages of marriage. I had all these expectations that I was dumping onto Robin. And thankfully, she's kind of persevered with me and helped me understand my own selfishness in the midst of these things too. But all of us come with all these dreams and then all the expectations, and I'm still learning in the midst of these things too. Very easy that when our dreams become expectations, that we turn a marriage covenant into a performance contract. We also, in those moments, are tempted to ditch our marriage, or it should be remain frustrated. And we think, well, the problem is with her. If I just kind of trade her in for, trade Barbie in for a Barbara, well, then I'll be happy. Or if I trade, Ken in for a Carl, well, that's the problem I'm having. I'll keep marriage, or just kind of trade in the person I'm going to enjoy the marriage with. But all we do is we take the same box of dreams and we bring them into the next marriage and the next marriage and the next marriage, and all those dreams again become expectations, and we load onto our spouse, and we fail to see that the problem is not just with them, but also with me and with you. That the fall means that we are selfish people. So what are we to do? Let me give a couple of bits of advice. First is that you would delight yourself in God. Whether you're single or married, you would see God as Mr. Wonderful. We often talk about finding the one. We often talk about finding Mr. or Ms. Right, but the whole thing is God is the right one. God is the one. God is wonderful. And that's why Jesus, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. That your identity, your security, the reason you get up in the morning, that the meaning and purpose you have in life, the things that you're looking for, that you would be satisfied in God, that God would be right at the center of your life, single or married, that God would take that number one spot. He would be the one, and everything else would be secondary. He would be Mr. Wonderful, the one that we are committed to. You see, often in marriage, often in our relationships, what tends to happen is we are so looking for someone or something, some created thing to satisfy the longing of our hearts that only God can satisfy. And when we don't find those things vertically in a relationship with God, and we start to look for them horizontally in some created thing, we'll be disappointed. It's actually called idolatry. And it can happen in a whole lot of different things when good things become the ultimate thing. And so it might be that you get a lot of comfort from turning your home into effectively a show home. Great. But if beneath that, there's a sense where you're trying to find your identity in the way that the home is kept, or your well-being, and kind of this show home state and the persona that gives to you. You might argue and say, Well, I'm just doing it because I want to provide a great home for my family. But if your family feel like they're walking on glass, broken glass, wherever they go, that's not healthy. It's kind of idolatry. You're no longer finding this well-being, this identity in God. You're looking for something else. Good thing, but you made it the ultimate thing. Or it might be work does that for you. That you work longer hours, trying to get ahead, trying to be successful. And again, good thing. But if that good thing becomes the ultimate thing when you're trying to get your reputation or your name or trail of successes behind you to show that you really are somebody, if that takes center stage, again, you can argue and say to your family, I'm working these longer hours because I want to provide for my family and I want to show them I love them. But really, deep down, you're just looking for something else that God should be at the center of. Kids can be like that too. Kids, good things, blessing from God. But when children are at the center and we try to find our identity or well-being or security in them and the stories of their success, the marriage relationship is hard because God needs to be at the center. And for all of us, we need to realize that we need to delight ourselves in God. Now let me talk to single folks here for a moment too. Because there is a myth that I hear in church world a lot. It says something like this: you aren't a whole person until you were married. And unfortunately that comes through, pastors say it from the front, it's kind of understood or it's implied in a whole bunch of different ways. It's a myth, it's completely incorrect. You know, I was reading this week about the days, the culture around Jesus' time, how Christianity was the very first religion that held up single adulthood as a viable way of life. See, all the cultures around at that time, there was no honor without family honor. There was no lasting significance without leaving heirs. Without children, your name effectively vaporized, it was gone. But Christianity's founder, Jesus, and his leading theologian, Paul, were both single. They lived their entire lives as single people. And single adults can not be seen as somehow less fully formed than married people. I mean, Jesus was the perfect man, and yet he was single. And as the early church reflected on that, the early church decided, well, we're not going to pressure people to be married any longer. In fact, Caesar Augustus, one of the emperors at the time of around the early church, he would fine widows if they didn't get remarried within 2 years' time. Christians honored and looked after widows, and they understood that singleness was not some plan B, but singleness was also a good thing. Marriage was a good thing. Singleness was a good thing. In fact, the Apostle Paul, single himself, said in Scripture, I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried, just as I am. All sorts of opportunities present in this single state. But it goes on. So the person who marries his fiancée does well too. And marriage is a good thing. The person who doesn't marry does even better. Holds up singleness in a very powerful way. Singleness is a good thing. For all of us, delight ourselves in God. Realize that Jesus can be the ultimate spouse in relationship with Him. And in this new family called the church that He brings us into, it's meant to be a more solid relationship and experience than any other family identity that we can experience. A marriage of love, unity, and understanding is not rooted in romance. It is rooted in worship. And the only way to harness these desires is to find joy in Jesus, to demote marriage and family in your heart and center your life on God, married or single. One other one. Said earlier how in marriage the two are united into one. And yet you can take that word united and you move just one small letter and it changes the whole word entirely, doesn't it? United to untied. And that's really one of the key problems in marriage, is the I starts to take center stage and it moves somewhere that it shouldn't, and we start to think about ourselves, and our selfishness so often gets in the way. And the whole thing is we need to harness the I to realize my selfishness needs to be curbed. I need to think about my spouse. I need to think about others. I need to live life well for them and bring out the best in them and serve them in some way and move from the untied back to the united by making sure that I am living well. The way to do that, Paul says, is to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. All of us submitting to one another, single or married. Wives submitting to husbands, husbands submitting to wives. All of us kind of coming around this together. That means that we place everything in the box. That, these expectations need to come back to dreams. It's okay to have dreams. Many of these dreams are good dreams. It's just we can't make them expectations. Zero expectations, really, on our spouse. Deciding that our spouse owes us nothing. That means we take responsibility for our own selfishness. To stop making excuses for what happens in here. And to actually see our own selfishness as the biggest problem in the marriage. To realize that Christ is the only one that can meet all the needs that I have, rather than loading those onto my spouse or onto marriage. It means we view marriage as a vehicle for spouses to help each other become their glorious future selves through sacrificial service and spiritual friendship. See, when marriage is about my satisfaction, it becomes about me. We need to harness the I. And if we are not to, let our dreams become expectations, we need to harness the I, and obviously we need to delight ourselves in God. When you came in today, you received a postcard. Effectively, it's some homework to do. And each week, during these next 3 weeks, there's going to be some homework. We'll be giving one of these out. It's for singles or couples. If you can take it now and have a bit of a look. If for some reason you didn't get it, make sure you pick one up on the way out. I'm asking that this week you would take some time. Might be this afternoon, you sit down with your spouse, with your boyfriend, girlfriend, or it might be that as a single person, you just sit down and reflect on these, maybe even do so with others, and just start to work through these questions, to think about how these dreams become expectations. Just to clarify some of the things here for couples. It says acknowledge, ask, appreciate. First of all, take responsibility for the expectations you've probably been loading onto your spouse. Be specific about that. Ask, where do you feel pressured to live up to my expectations? I'm not asking you to ask your spouse, hey, what's in your box of dreams? Because, if Robin said to me, I've always dreamt that I was going to marry this All Black. I mean, she's out of luck. And I'm never going to look like some, I know you think that I'm like bulging and muscle behind all this, but really I'm not. And, so she's going to be out of luck. But I don't want to hear her box of dreams, but I want to hear how I can help make our marriage even better. And then when, ladies, when your husband does something and moves towards what you're asking him to do, appreciate him, reward him. Even, don't expect him to do it again, but appreciate him. And because often what happens when we appreciate our spouse, normally there's more and more things that seem to happen. It's kind of a good payoff from that whole thing, right? So I'm asking that you take some time to do this because we want to have these discussions, build a culture where we are developing as people to be healthy around this crazy little thing called love. And then couples, some extra homework for you, but actually a good one. And this is a date night challenge. I'm going to ask the ushers to start passing these around now. I'm asking sometime in the next 2 weeks that you will, step into this date night challenge we have for you. And marriages, or, if you're a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, pick up on this too if you want to. And just sometime over the next 2 weeks, and don't confuse them. This is homework. This is like different discussion. This is pure fun. So you can go out and talks about, choosing avatars. So ladies, you choose, your husband chooses whether, you're going to be a flirty Frida, a wordy Wendy, or a comedic Carla. Ladies, you choose if you want your guy to be a funny Fred, a tuned-in Tom, or romantic Rob. And, you play that avatar, basically, and there's a whole bunch of things to go through over the course of the date night. I want us to put in place some healthy habits. Life is so hard. It's just good to get out and have some fun in the midst of that. And so if you can step into this, try to book in a time to get out and just have some fun. And I want to hear some of the stories next week and the week after. Now, while that's all been passed out, I'm going to chat to just a few people here. We're going to do this during our series a bit. And so if I can invite Emma and the Parkers up to the couches up here. Can we give them a bit of an appreciation for coming up here? Emma, I'll give you the microphone. So, Emma, I was speaking before about how, my hope for us at GCC is that we would be a church that helps everybody, married and single, live with this crazy little thing called love. So, can you tell us, I guess, some of the pressures you feel around this whole topic of marriage that you face, maybe even from the Christian community?
I think in the church we have had this real history of pressuring single people like me to be married. And the thing is, it often comes from these really beautiful, heartfelt intentions of trying to love each other. So obviously we want everyone to be happy, and we see people in love, and we know that love is good and marriage is a good thing. And so we try and get alongside people and encourage them. But what happens is we can conflate a lot of our personal expectations and lifestyle choices into the truth of how they should live their life and how God wants them to live. And I know that, for example, we see these truths of it's not good for man to be alone and that marriage is a blessing, and we make it, okay, well, everyone should be married, and ideally between the ages of 21 and 28, and it's best if it's the first person you've ever dated, and you shouldn't have any sexual sin, and you should get married in this church, and you should really wear a white dress, and how many bridesmaids are you having, and you're serving that food? And so it becomes this giant, overwhelming thing that isn't what it was about in the start. And the other thing we can struggle with in the church is awkwardness about addressing the hard things. So we see singledom or divorce, and we just don't know where that fits in our theology, and we don't want to risk encouraging it if it's sinful, so we just stay away from the topic, and we stay away from those people sometimes. And deep down, I think we're afraid that if we get alongside those people, we're going to learn that they're just like us. We're afraid that marriage could break up. We don't want that to happen to us, and it's contagious, so we just keep away from those people.
Emma, in the last couple of days, we've had some online dialogue around this topic, and one of the things you wrote in, when we're talking about this, you said, I remember God meeting me in that place and saying to me, Emma, the great story of your life isn't going to be the man you marry, it's my love for you. It's not about your wedding day, but about the day you became part of my bride, the church. Can you tell us more about that?
So I was in a long-term relationship with an amazing godly man, and we'd been going out for about 3 years, and a lot of people who dated after us had started getting married, so we're at the point where everyone would turn to us and be like, you're next, and we'd say, yes, of course we are. But I had this discontentment within me, and eventually I realised that I wanted to break up with him. And that was the hardest thing to come to terms with, because it felt so wrong. I felt really guilty. It didn't seem like the godly thing to do. I'd absorbed these messages from the church that we are to set an example to the sinners out there of how to live our lives, to show them that if you obey God and do it right, you can have this blessing. And I'd heard that love is a verb, you choose to love, it's not a feeling. And so when I thought about breaking up with this man who was so godly, and I looked at lots of single people who wish they had what I had, I felt guilty and I felt shame and I felt selfish, like I was rejecting something that God had blessed me with. And God kind of came down and took me through this process of teaching me that it's not about what you do, it's not about who you marry, it's about who you are and whose you are, about being God's child, and that God doesn't want to make us happy, he wants to make us holy, and the way he does that is he calls us into the hard things in life, to take those steps which are scary, but make us trust him and make us become more like him. So for some people that is getting married and making a commitment, and for me, God was calling me to break up a relationship and to become single again, and to give up the status that comes with having a future doctor as a husband, and to give up the status that comes with having it all figured out and being 21 and the youth leader who's got the great guy, about just realising that none of us have it all together, and then when we're humble, we give glory to God through our weaknesses.
Wow. Wow. If there's one piece of advice you would give us as a church to help single people, what would it be?
To be real, and I think that's for everyone. It helps people who are married, people who are divorced, people who are struggling with anything else. Just to be real and to get into those messy areas and to walk alongside people in our brokenness, that none of us have it together, whether we're married or not. And the way we're real is by telling each other our stories. For me, I'd never seen a breakup. I hadn't heard someone's story in the church of how to break up well, and I really needed to see that because I was seeing demonstrated this is how you marry someone, and that wasn't the story for my life. And when we're real with each other, I think we can confront the fact that our expectations aren't always of God, and we need to sometimes break those down and go, okay, when I'm projecting this on someone, is this helpful? Is this what God says? Or is this how I think people should live their lives? And then just practically chill out about dating. You know, you're not married until you're married, and I think we get to this point where on your first date, you're already considering, how will I broach 10 years of marriage with this person? Are we compatible? And the problem with that is, you know, people are saying, your babies are going to be so cute. You're not married yet, you're not there. That can ruin a relationship in itself. And what happens when you try and break up, like I was doing, I felt like I was going through a divorce. Like, that's how serious it was. And it's like, we're just dating. We're not married yet. It's not that big a deal.
Some really good things there. Can we show some appreciation to Emma? And then Alan and Kay. So, I mean, I've been here at the church for 6 months, and one of the things that has just impressed me is just the way you guys relate together. How long have you been married?
We pretend. We've been together for 14 and a half years. Married for 14 and a half years. We've known one another for about 18 years. And we were both married previously. We were both widowed and came into a relationship here at Green Lane. And it's been fun, I think.
What advice, I mean, because married now and then married previously too, what advice from that would you give to us here about healthy marriage?
Today we've heard a little bit about expectations. And what I can say is don't expect, if you get into the situation that we were in, to find exactly the same strengths and weaknesses in your new partner.
Yeah.
Kay is a totally different lady from Irene, and I am a totally different guy from Roger, who was her first husband.
I now watch cricket and rugby. Alan's still learning to play cards.
So in other words, there are some things that you guys have put in to relate to the other person.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing, don't expect them to be the same. And that's really good for you people who are in second marriages. You know, you go in there and you put the expectation box there. You thought it was dreams, that the things were going to be different to what you were in the first relationship, but it doesn't happen. Okay, but that's fine.
What other bits of advice would you give to us?
Okay, major in ours is commitment. Fun is way up there. But the superfix glue for our marriage is this. And Roger and I had the same feeling in our marriage, but for Alan and I,
this is a green book? Is there something?
Green book is my Bible. Okay. It's not my phone. I bought my Bible. It's pretty cool, eh? Yep. If you are unhappy with each other in the day, you've had a little bit of a little, you can't pray together. So if you have the rule that you pray together in the morning and in the night, an argument can't last any more than 12 hours. Is that good thinking? Anyway. We do. We find this as our superfix glue. In the morning, you don't have to read a lot together, but we find reading together and praying together. We have the sanctuary of our bedroom because we work at home, so our bedroom is like our sanctuary where we have our Bible readings together. And we actually use the word for the day, the Rhema one, which only gives you one verse, but we always read more around it because it puts the whole thing into perspective. Today it's told us how to grow old and keep going, which is wonderful. But, bear fruit. And that's another thing for our marriage. We know that our marriage is the commitment to each other, but the Lord shows us more and more and more that Alan's and my marriage, our relationship, is a ministry because we have so much to do with pre-marriage, with couples who are going through problems, people who are newly married, and we realise that we need to be fine examples for other people to be able to look at. We need to be transparent for other people to be able to come up to us and say, so it's not abnormal to da-da-da-da-da. And I think there needs to be more people in this church that are there to be transparent to younger people. We need mentors in marriage.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, you mentioned something on passing before about fun. What is that? Putting you on the spot, hopefully, censored.
I'm actually very boring.
Yeah.
And Kay's the fun one. So she keeps the fun going in the relationship, and we make sure that we laugh. And if Kay doesn't laugh, I'm in trouble. All right? She has to be laughing, she has to be enjoying life, and it's just a key part of our relationship. We've just had 5 days sitting in Rarotonga, which was an absolute blessing in more ways than one. And just to have time on our own, which we thought we would do, was awesome. Just 2 of us. But being us, we couldn't just do that. So we met up with a pastor and his wife, actually we thought he was a school teacher, and he was. He was running a Christian school. Just a name we were given, we fortunately found them. Next thing we find, he's actually the pastor of a church, and we went to church, and then we went to lunch, and so it went on. We just bumped into people. Yeah. We keep bumping into people, and we were able to minister and give out and serve in that area as well.
So I want to hear how the date night challenge goes the next week or two as well.
You bet.
Okay, can we appreciate these guys too? And so let me close with our benediction, and then remember that you've got your homework this week. And then for couples, the day night challenge, really want to hear and get some feedback on those over the next week or two. Let me close with our benediction. My brothers and sisters of Green Lane Christian Centre, may we be a church that proactively and positively helps everybody, married or single, to live well with this crazy little thing called love. Love well. Amen. Hey, see you next week. Why don't you turn to the person around you, beside you, and share a big takeaway for you this week as we step into this new series. See you next week.